The Middlesex County Museum welcomes you to another of our video oral histories. Get comfortable, sit back, and enjoy. Steve, I'm Marilyn South with the Middlesex County Museum and Historical Society, and we really appreciate your willingness to talk to us about your experiences in Vietnam and to give us a sense of your background. Where were you born?
I was born in Newport News, Virginia, in January 25th, 1950.
And you finished high school where?
Yes, yes, I did finish high school. I went to Newport News High School and uh, graduated, and being in the 11th and 12th grade, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, but I watched the war in Vietnam every night on the 6 o'clock news from my 8th grade year till my senior year. And I was always wanted to be a Marine since I was a little fella playing Army and Marines with my little buddies in the neighborhood. And nothing was going to keep me out of the Marine Corps. That was my desire. Uh, and so in my senior year, I joined the Marine Corps right after February, which was the Tet Offensive in Vietnam that I watched again that night on TV on the news. But I enlisted in the Marine Corps on what they called a 120-day delay program. I could join the Marine Corps, but I didn't go until 120 days later after I graduated to Paris Island for my boot camp. So in that time counted on when I got out of the Marine Corps, that 120 days. So it was a smart thing to do, I guess, if I knew I was going anyway. And I went to my basic training at Paris Island in late June of 68. And after that, I spent 12 weeks of infantry training at Camp Lejeune, at Camp Geiger in Carolina. And that lasted another 12 weeks. And after that, most guys go straight to Vietnam, as either privates or PFCs, not much rank. And but I didn't go immediately to Vietnam. They sent me to Cuba for 6 months. So that was beneficiary to me because I picked up Lance Corporal in Cuba, and Cuba was a place where they sent Vietnam veterans that had done their thing in Vietnam and still had a year or so left on their enlistment. So they sent them there, and they didn't have to do anything but lay around because they've done their service, and that was the main thing. But I got to hear from these guys intricate stories about up at the DMZ, what the Tet Offensive was like, what it was like in Hue City, and all the places uh, before I got there. And they told me about the enemy and important tips. So I arrived in Vietnam in
Yeah, okay.
September the 18th, 1969, as a Lance Corporal. So I kind of outranked a lot of the guys in the squad that they put me in, but that was just the benefits of going to Cuba prior to Vietnam. Uh, I arrived in Vietnam, like I said, on September the 18th, 1969, and it's like a whole company of us arrive, and then you go to this transit place where they split you up in many different directions in the Marine Corps and who you get assigned to. And I was assigned to Delta Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Marines. And our rear base camp was in An Hoa, which was 26 miles southwest of Da Nang, the air base. And like I say, I was with Delta 15, and they came and picked me up in a Jeep and took me, to An Hoa. And I first met my company commander was uh, Jim Webb, who became Senator Jim Webb of Virginia and Secretary of the Navy under Ronald Reagan. He was number one in his class in Annapolis and had won countless awards and stars ribbons. So I was very impressed. But at the time, I didn't know all this. I just knew his name was Jim Webb, and he's written 6 novels about Vietnam. I have some on my bookshelf, and so that's how I kind of ended up, where I was going to be for a year, 12 months. We operated out of An Hoa, which is in Quang Nam province. All of our bases in Vietnam, of all the units, were really right in the middle of enemy territory. Uh, so any direction you went out in, and every operation you went out in, when you landed in your choppers, you were in enemy territory, hostile. And it wasn't like the European War where we had front lines, up at the front, and everything way back was safe. Not that way in Vietnam. You couldn't trust anybody, so we literally went on our daily patrols, uh, out into the bush of An Hoa.
And you shared with me earlier how you figured out where you were with the
Oh, yeah.
map. There was no GPS.
Yeah, we had maps. When we landed, you were issued a map like this, or prior to the patrol and operation, the squad leaders went over the map with the platoon commanders and all this to make sure everybody knows who's going to be where and what grid coordinates and things like that. So there was no GPS at that time at all. You had to learn how to read your map and compass well. I mean, the classes we had on map and compass reading were almost not quite as extensive as our classes on first aid, how to keep your buddy alive, not to do anything dramatic, just stop the bleeding so you can get him on a medevac chopper. And but uh, you just really had to know how to do that. And in the Marine Corps, and I'm not sure about any other branch of the service, but we had to learn to fire all during our infantry training. Every weapon that the Marine Corps has, including the mortar tubes, how to sight them in. Because if a mortarman was to get killed, it's like, who's going to operate the mortar? Well, you jump in there and start firing with the mortar. So we learned everything about everybody. Our first aid training was very extensive. Uh, uh, we immediately began. My first uh, operation, so to speak, was probably about 8 days after I got there. So I was one of the new guys, and they were always coming and going because we all arrived in small numbers, not the whole division, and we left one at a time as well as arrived one at a time. And so we all had different dates when we would rotate back to the States. Excuse me. But we went out on these patrols, and this was a company size operation. So we were on a big hill, all of Delta Company, and I think even Alpha Company was with us, which was a lot of Marines, but it was a big hill that we operated on. And as soon as you get set up, your mortarmen will prep the area all around that hill just in case, and they get their sights, adjusted. And the first time I even saw someone wounded, young girl, to the
Okay.
up on the hill where we were to see these, hoping the corpsman could do something for her. But she lost a lot of blood because the sheet was just crimson red, And anyway, they got up there, and it was they laid her on the ground, and of course everybody's come around. But some of the guys that had been there for 5 and 6 months and seen some of their buddies killed and wounded, uh, don't have a real fond uh, liking, I guess, to maybe some of the civilians because many of them collaborated with the enemy and they were in a tough spot. But some were saying things that I thought, well, as a new guy and observing, uh, that I thought was inappropriate or kind of cruel. And of course, the corpsman looked at her and she was burning up with fever and shaking, and she literally passed on in our presence. But I kind of thought, but that's the way Vietnam was. You come in immediately to a shock when you see trauma, when you see a dead body, or several dead bodies, or a wounded Marine. You've got to quickly, you can't remain detached. You almost have to, each day get a little tougher, a little meaner, a little less compassionate, and that extends almost every day until your 12 months is up. You cannot remain uh, detached. You just have to get in there and do your thing and hope you come home alive. So uh, later on, as days went by, we continued on patrols. It was more of a cat mouse thing than, taking a hill and losing, 700 wounded. And uh, our job in Quang Nam province was rice denial. The NVA, a large division of NVA, was in that area, some up into Quaison Mountains and Charlie Ridge, but An Hoa, and we called it Arizona Territory. That's a nickname for the basin and the base of these mountains because that's where the rice farmers were. We got supplied every day by choppers and ammunition and sea rations and mail. When they left North Vietnam down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, of course, they had stockpiles of weapons in different places and entered Vietnam. They had to steal the rice from the farmers to feed their army. So we were there to prevent that and try to offer some safety to the civilians. So it was a rough situation to be in. So it was a cat and mouse situation. You're looking for them, they're looking for you. When we go out on a patrol, usually it's a squad size patrol, which is 12 to 14 men. And then they send a machine gun team with you. So that brings you up to about 15 or 16. And then that's it. So you go out on a patrol, and we remained 10 yards apart, like maybe from here to the other side of the living room. So if a booby trap was tripped by the guy in front of you or the point man, it would go off between you, and you just may get peppered with some shrapnel, but at least it wouldn't kill you unless it was a large mortar round or an artillery round. So that was a daily thing. When you went on patrols, you marked areas on your map that would be a good spot to set up an ambush for the next night. One squad would take the day patrol, and the next squad would go out at night and set up an ambush. So that was a constant rotation like that. So you put up likely spots and we found caves, we found tunnels. Not every time you went out, but we could find places in deeply remote, thick jungle and stuff like that, of tunnel complexes. Some were fortified. But mostly, even in villages, you'd walk into a village and you saw women and children and very, very old men. We called them papasan because the teenagers and the other men were working for the Viet Cong. They called them a farmer by day and a VC by night. So you had to hope that what they told you was the truth. You go see, where's the VC? Oh, no VC, no VC. Well, they're in a tunnel right outside the village there, or maybe under a floor mat or wherever they could cover it up. And we'd find weapons. We'd find Viet Cong in there, some NVA. But we weren't nice about it. You pulled a pin on a hand grenade like this right here. This is a dud. It's hollow, but we each had to carry 4 frags. We'd hang them on our, stuff, and we each had to carry lots of ammo, magazines. I carried 21 magazines for just me alone. Because you never could have enough of it. When a machine gun team went out with us, the guys in the squad that didn't fire the machine gun carried 2,000 rounds of gun ammo, because if you get in a firefight, you need it. So we were burdened down. Uh, 2 or 3 guys in the squad carried a Laws rocket, which it was an anti-tank weapon. It was a tube that extended with a sight that would pop up where you could take out a tank. Now, we didn't fight tanks, but it could destroy a bunker. But most of the time, we'd put a claymore mine at the entrance to the hole or throw a grenade in there, and then you'd have to come in and pull out the bodies. But, there may be 10 or 15 dead in VA. And of course, the villagers just got through telling us no VC, no VC. So it was cruel, it was harsh, but it made you mad dog mean after many months of going through that, and in the process losing 2 or 3 guys a day on a patrol from booby traps. So that's what life was like for me in Vietnam and in Quang Nam province. It was to deny the enemy the fuel that they need to fuel their army, and that was rice. Now,
Interesting.
we each, as some units would get overrun, or the South Vietnamese army, we call them ARVNs, that fought along with us, sometimes would get some of them wiped out. Well, the enemy would take their weapons, so they had some M16s, they had grenade launchers, a M79. There was one night we were making a night movement, and we decided to stop and set up a perimeter. Usually the first thing we do if we're going to stay somewhere permanently is dig our foxholes first. And we would always dig them in a big 360-degree circle, like the covered wagons in the westerns, and put the machine guns at 3 strategic locations in case you got hit. And so that was the thing we had to do on a regular basis. And that night, when it was pitch dark and we couldn't make a move or a sound. See, that's why you don't go walking just talking and under normal conditions, because you give away your position. So we were laying there and, took turns trying to get a little nap or sleep. We drew straws for watch, we'd each pull like an hour, and by the end the sun would be up. But nobody all slept. Somebody stayed on the ready at all times. And we heard boop. And that's how that M79 grenade, we call it the blooper, was a name. We heard bloop. And in a couple seconds, boom, right kind of amongst us. Luckily nobody got hurt. But what they do, they probe your lines, and they want one Marine to fire, and then they know where you are. So you just had to, don't make any noise. Just keep quiet and just be ready. And eventually, after firing 3 rounds kind of in our vicinity, he left because nobody returned fire. Fire discipline is a major thing. You don't crack up and just start, shoot. You're well trained. Marine Corps teaches you, combat training is next to none. And you know how to operate, and everybody that you're with is your brother. Because there's a lot of truth to that saying, he who sheds his blood with me today will be my brother.
It's touching for me.
And that's why we answer the phone when we call each other, Semper Fi, my brother warrior. And Semper Fi means always faithful. And we would lay down our lives for each other. We would leave a safe position to retrieve a wounded guy. Nobody's left behind. And everybody watches each other's back. And later on in November, we were out in the bush again. We were on what we had a hill, we called it the hot dog, because it was not a real high hill, but it was high ground, but it was long, and we, could get a company up there, a bunch of Marines, and we would run patrols off of that hill, and just do the same thing every day, the routine stuff. And anyway, we were not far from the hot dog. We moved to form a blocking position. This was in November the 20th, 1969, about 2 months after I was with the plane. And every night, also, they send out 4 listening posts. Even though you're all dug in on this safe, secure hill, they would send out 4 Marines and a radio out north, south, east, and west of the perimeter. And you are a early warning if you detect anything, of course, there's always one man at night or 2 in every foxhole ready, and you take turns sleeping, and they stand in the foxhole. And I went out on that listening post. My squad leader, myself, I've been in country about 8 weeks, and 2 other guys. And we found a good spot where it was a little mound of dirt, maybe not quite as high as this piano. And my squad leader thought, well, we'll lay right here, and all you do is listen. You're not out there to make contact with the enemy. But if you see a bunch of NVA moving, you get on the see, they check you every 15 minutes, a radio check from the perimeter where the rest of the Marines are dug in. And every 15 minutes, if everything was okay, you just key your handset, and back on their end, it would go, but it wouldn't make that noise out in the bush, you see. So you stealthily, you don't get on the radio and say, everything's okay. You just key the handset. Well, we hadn't been out there 2 hours. And in our situation, all hell broke loose. We were getting ready to draw straws as to who was had first watch, and 2 were laying down. And my squad leader had the radio, and he dove behind that berm, and we all huddled up against that berm. But I threw my arm across the guy that was already laying down, because if he set up, it would have killed him, because these were tracer rounds. Every 5th round in an M60 machine gun is a tracer round. So when you see these war movies and you see balls of fire, well, they're tracers. That's how you can move your weapon at night and see where it's going. But in between those bullets are 4 machine gun rounds, so it's deadly. So I covered, don't get, and by that time we'd all kind of got against that berm. We didn't know what the heck was going on. The handset on a Prick 25 radio will go beyond the wall in that bathroom, probably 15 feet. So when he dove, he had the handset so he could at least talk. But we just listened. In all this fire that seemed to be coming all from the perimeter where we were. Well, some NVA were making a night movement. See, they can't travel much during the day because there's so many aircraft and choppers up above, they can't move in massive numbers. They have to wait till night. So we rule the day and they rule the night. So they were making a movement. They were walking 4 abreast, all their combat equipment, and heading right for our perimeter. They didn't know that. But anyway, when the fire started, these NVA were scattering, and we were in the edge of a tree line, and they were out in a open area like out here. So they were running for cover to the trees. Well, immediately when the first bullet was fired, the mortarmen were shooting up illumination rounds. They go up in the air and pop and hang. It's a light, and they drift down on parachutes, and they lit that whole field up within 5 minutes, like noon, like 12 o'clock noon. You could see anything you wanted to see. But we still didn't know the full brunt of what was going on. So here we are, 4 of us out there huddled against that berm, kind of shaking. And we thought we had been spotted, and they were coming to just go wipe us out. And we could hear gooks, we called all of them, whether they were VC or NVA, the gooks. They were running to that tree line where we were. So you still don't fire your weapon, because if it's 40 or 60 of them and it's 4 of you, they'll know exactly where you are. But they were running past us and beyond us. We could hear their equipment running. That's how close they were. And of course, the illuminations were going up before one or two could burn out. There were more up there just floating down. And as they float down, they distort all the tree trunks, look like they're moving, of shadows. So we laid in, we finally gained control of ourselves. I guess your adrenaline kicks in and you can do things you thought you could never do. But we crawled out from that berm and we laid foot to foot. So one of us north, south, east, west. We took our 4 grenades and set them in front of us. We put our bayonets on our M16, expecting to be overrun. I lay there that night uh, praying, and I'm sure these other three, because they say there's no atheist, such thing as an atheist in a foxhole. But we were praying, but we got control of ourselves and ready to, I guess, go down in a blaze of glory, you know. But I remember praying, Lord, please don't let me die here like this tonight, and my folks wouldn't know, what happened. But we waited and waited and waited. And like I said, they got further away, and we could hear less of them. So I don't know how many were saved, got away. Did maybe 15 or 20. But my squad leader finally broke radio silence and got on the radio and called the CP group on the hill and said, "What the hell's going on?" And well, another listening post. You have to go out about 100 yards from the perimeter. You don't just go out and squat. You have to be, but so there's a pretty enough wide gap where something could still go between two listening posts. They had already called the CP and said, there's about 40 to 50 NVA walking straight towards you guys. So they got the answer and said quietly, get ready, they're coming. They're coming. So it's not like they were attacking us to kill us. They were trying to get from point A to point B, and we were in the way. So they literally walked into a hornet's nest when our guys returned fire, and that's what was going out where we were, just over our heads. If we didn't have that burn, we wouldn't have made it. So I said, it's another time in my life when I feel like God had a hand in it, that thank goodness for that burn. So the shooting stopped and the illuminations were still coming down and kept coming down for a while. And they sent a squad out. They swept. They got on a straight line and swept to us, walking through dead NVA, and uh, brought us back in because we were pretty shook up, because we didn't know what it was. Anyway, so we came in back to the hill, and then we were walking through in the water of the rice paddies, dead NVA, and they were everywhere. I guess it was about 20 or more, and got back on the little piece of high ground we were on, and we thought everything was over, and we were analyzing the situation, and as there were four or three other Marines beside me as we were just walking, not really prepared to be on the ready because they were all dead, we thought. But up against the rice paddy dike was a guy that just dove an enemy soldier, an NVA, and one of the guys as we were coming in saw something move. This person, we could see his feet, but we thought he was dead. So we put our weapons on him and said, Chu hoi, which means surrender. And by that time, he rolled over and he was laying on his AK-47 with his hand on the trigger. And they have a banana clip, I think it's like 30 rounds. So he rolled over firing. Well, the first thing we did, even though we had our guns on, we hit the ground, so he literally fired over our heads. And he got up to run. And thank goodness that he emptied his magazine when he did that. Because he could have killed some other Marines. But he began to run away from me, and I guess he was 15 feet from me when I fired, and I hit him, I know, somewhere in the back. But he didn't go down right then. He kind of struggled to keep getting away. and he was kind of getting closer to the ground, but then I heard, and I'm slowly walking behind him, wondering when he's going to actually drop. But then some other Marines shot, and he did go down, and then someone else I think walked up and make sure just feel, pumped him for the, and the guy was still kind of moaning, but four or five of us gathered around, and the guys were stomping him and kicking him, but it was a kind of what I call pent up emotions, and anger over what they've done to some of their buddies. I mean, and so that was a constant thing too, this revenge thing. Uh, uh, and anyway, that calmed down and was over, and we went out there at first light to look at the dead NVA, and their helmets had fallen off, their weapon, they were shot to pieces, and we couldn't go out there until they said when it gets light enough. So we waited for the first light, and we were like almost getting ready to run a foot race, ready to see who could get out there first. So we were already, I guess you could say by November, after 2 months, I was already kind of getting like those guys were on the hill, and I was going to go out there and see what I could find, to bring home with me. So I saw more and learned more about the human anatomy by the condition of these bodies and how bad they were. And uh, one guy was, you could see inside of his skull, and it was awful. But I knelt down beside this guy, and he had a belt buckle on with a knife and a star on the buckle, for the NVA, and I was still okay so far. And then I reached down and I felt the wallet, and I opened that wallet, and there was a picture of his family, and that one piece of money right there was him. And I didn't care about that money, but I took the belt and brought it home with me. And uh, but that was my first real trauma, with that situation. And then later on, we were on different hills, different positions, but we stayed in Quang Nam province. We had a big area to cover, and uh, the daily patrols with the, losing two or three guys this day and maybe two the next, it wasn't every day that you lost somebody, but you never knew who's going to be next, and I know all the rest of the guys will attest to this too. When you're on a patrol and you're 10 yards apart, whether you're in the thick jungle in Charlie Ridge or the Quaison Mountains, you had to close that gap a little bit if you're in high grass or in a jungly area. You got to be able to see the man in front of you, or you could, you know, to, so we tightened up a little bit, but still you knew you were constantly being watched. And they seemed to always pick and choose the place and when they wanted to open up on you. They wanted the advantage. So you were scared, and but uh but you finally, after so many patrols, it's a routine thing, and you're just walking along, and you're pretty normal, but you just sense the whole time that they're on you, their eyes are on. And snipers were bad. They could just fire one round and take out an officer or somebody important. They looked for anybody that was looking at their map. You know, if I had this folded up in my pocket and I said, let's take five, everybody was sitting right where they were because we all had to walk where the man. You don't go over there and sit under a shade tree. You sit where everybody's walked because there wouldn't be a booby trap there. But you'd have to lay your map down, and I always got down on my knee where I couldn't be seen from a sniper. Because if I stood up and I'm opening my map, that sniper knows I'm important. I'm one of the leaders, or probably the leader, and they'll take you out. Your radio man, that's the next one they want. But we were out on a patrol one time when we were short a lieutenant, and Staff Sergeant Galloway right there became kind of platoon commander for about a month. And he then made the mistake of doing that. He said, "Take 5." We all sit down, and he laid his M16 across his arm, and he's looking at the map and getting everything straight, standing up. Well, we heard, and it knocked him down. The velocity, but it hit his M16 right where the front sight was, where that handle is, which was about that far from his heart, because his weapon like this. So I got a picture in here of him later pointing to his weapon with the caption, "They hate me." But uh, you got to live and learn. That's why they always say you never salute in the field. You don't indicate to that other person that he's an officer. We didn't wear any brassy stuff. Everything was black chevrons, and the officers didn't have brass on their helmets like in World War II, the captain things or whatever, because it'll get you killed. So you had to get smart and learn the ways of the bush. Sometimes you can learn to see that booby traps are marked. They'll take a stick. So they need to let the other VC and Viet Cong see what I'm saying. They'll set a booby trap, but they don't want to kill each other. But and I remember being on a patrol one day, and I saw like these 3 sticks were sticking in a kind of an unusual situation. I just stopped the patrol and got off of that trail. And when I got back, see, we had these Kit Carson scouts, which were enemy soldiers that we had captured, but they said they would be scouts for us and take us to some places and he said, "Well, what did it look like?" And we call them chew hoys, that wanted to help us when their chips were down and it had nothing else to do. They want to help us, and so he told me, and he said it was the right thing to do, but booby traps were just everywhere, and it was a constant thing. And we were out on a sweep one day. We were going to set up a line, one platoon, and the other 2 were going to be choppered down with some South Vietnamese ARVNs and sweep a large area towards our line, and hope we'd trap them in there. But they saw us coming across this field. You can see how the field is and the woods are in this open field. Well, they saw us coming across the rice paddy to enter the jungle to set up. Well, they had another idea. See, they don't go along with the plan. And you never know. But anyway, we were proceeding on, and we got in there before we entered the jungle. Uh, a, a guy trips a booby trap, and it was a mortar round. It wasn't in my squad, but it was in second platoon. And of course, then they started capping at us. That's what we call shooting, to disrupt everything, and it wasn't bad enough in like real intensive enemy fire. It was harassment, we call them. And it still makes you get out on the ground and, be ready to return fire. But we had to get him on a medevac chopper quick. I need
You're doing a great job.
Yeah.
You really are. You're doing a great job.
But so we lost that guy. So we got a medevac chopper in, and they would love to down a helicopter too. So they have the weapons to do it. So here comes the medevac chopper, and we put him on, and he's on his way to the field hospital, and we proceeded to move a little bit further, and they had really booby trapped an area, pretty heavy. And 2 guys in front of me, you have your point man, and then another guy, and then the squad leader, and then the radio man. We just heard this explosion, and one of the new guys, Vince Moran, he was in country for about 7 weeks from Tennessee near Nashville. Married to Paula, his wife. We'd get together. Took me 34 years to find him. But anyway, He went up, gosh, as far as 8 foot in the air, and the dirt flew all over, and luckily no shrapnel on me. But he tripped a 60 millimeter mortar round, and he was laying on his back, screaming, screaming. God, my God, don't let me die, please don't let me die. And he was just, screaming and screaming. So I was one of the first ones to get to him. Then the corpsman got over there, and he was laying with his leg across a piece of a dike like, but you could see no rigidness in that leg. It looked just like a rope, it was broken in so many places. And you got to be careful too when you're patching somebody up if they have compound fractures. You can't stop the bleeding by pressure. So we used, and we all carried a battle dressing on the back of our cartridge belt for my us. Well, I used mine, and the other guy used his. The corpsman always had bundles of bandage dressings, and the chopper was already called, the second one, 15 minutes apart now. Uh, we got him on the chopper. Like I said, he even called his mother, Mom, please. And we were putting him on the chopper, and they were still firing. They were still just enough to keep us on, crouched down, and I had to crawl over there to work on him and try the best we could to stop the bleeding. And that was the last time I saw Vince, and it took me 34 years to find him.
That's great.
But I got another story in a book about that. And we have, back in 2004, gotten together and his wife. But that's kind of how life was. But I'll back up just a second. Vince had tripped this booby trap, these two guys, on November 27th, 69. I'm sorry, February of 70. But before that, 2 or 3 weeks prior to that, we were on a similar situation, and Dale Wilson in 3rd Platoon tripped that artillery round, which he's lucky to be alive. Uh, I said earlier that, he was conscious, but he could look at himself, he couldn't hear anything. It was just total silence because both eardrums were blown out. And he saw one of his boots and part of a leg over here, one over there, but he wasn't so sure about his arm. But he told his men, we're more concerned about each other than ourselves. Don't come over here. I'm okay, stay where you are, stay where you are, because we were afraid if anybody moved, we'd just do nothing but keep tripping booby traps, and they do like to set one close by, something like that. So when the corpsman rushes and you're yelling, corpsman up, corpsman up. Well, sometimes it'll take out the corpsman, it's just dirty play all the way around. But Dale said as he laid in that sun, and I'm getting all this information later because we've been having reunions for 53 years. And I just met Dale 2 years ago at my first reunion.
Great.
And it was like God had a hand in that too. That, I always prayed that before I die, I could physically touch and be in the presence of guys I served with. But Dale went to block the sun out of his eyes, the hot, scorching sun. And when he went to raise his arm, his hands like slapped his face because it was almost severed, and it fell down. But they got tourniquets on him and off on a medevac chopper. But that first guy that got hit that medevac earlier, when they were 15 minutes apart, that chopper got hit by ground fire, and it almost went down. And see, I had gotten a rumor that Vince was on a chopper that got shot down. So I was for 34 years didn't know. But that helicopter just barely made it to Hill 52, and another chopper met it there to get the wounded, to the hospital. But it was uh, cat and mouse every day. Uh, uh, and back in December, we were on Hill 52, and it was December 21st when choppers came out, and my squad leader said, uh, "You need to jump on a chopper and go back to An Hoa because there's something in your record book." I said, "Okay." Well, another guy, the guy that had 35 days in country, had to get stitches in his mouth, so he went along with me. When we got to An Hoa, he went to get his stitches, and I went just into that company tent there, that old headquarters, to see what was wrong. It was not a big deal, but we got it straight. And the other guy, Jim Lowry, had gotten his stitches, and in the meantime, there was a guy that just came back from R&R at An Hoa. He made it from Da Nang to An Hoa, but he needed to get a chopper ride to Hill 52, where the rest of our unit was. Well, about 5 that afternoon on December 21st, there was a convoy going back, to Hill 52. And it was loaded down with all kinds of soda pop and things, that guys could get flats of Pepsis, and piled them in that truck. And it was a 6 by, like that had a canvas back on the back, but that was rolled down, and we always put sandbags in the bed of those trucks. It's a lot of weight, but if you would run over anything, it would help. It didn't do much when it was a 60-pound of TNT, but anyway, he said, asked me, "Corporal Larson, are you going back on the convoy?" I said, "No, I'm going to stay here tonight," because I knew at An Hoa there was an underground bunker, with a radio. We didn't have the GPS, so I couldn't sit in front of a computer screen and see the person I'm talking to. I had to do it one way by radio. So I timed it to where it was 13 hours difference. And I knew my mom would be home from church for an hour and in the kitchen cooking. So I got my instructions from the guy in that bunker. I'm in this little glass cubicle with ear things on. And he said, "Now it's one way. And where's the closest military base to your home?" I said, "Langley Field." And so they would actually radio to the West Coast to the East Coast. And, I had 5 minutes to talk. And he told me what to do. One, say a few words, press it, and say over. And then, so I heard my mother answering the phone in Hampton, in her sweet little voice. And it was a guy from Langley Field saying, "Mrs. Larson, I have your son Steve on the phone." And she started in hysterics. "Steve, Steve, Steve." He calmed her down and said, "Miss Larson, you say a few words. It's one way, then say over." So she cut it short and said over. And I don't remember the extent, but what did you tell your mother when in probably 2.5 minutes, when she has 2.5 minutes with, to say what we got to do. But she knew I was alive and healthy. And, but just hearing her voice, was, wow, on the other side of the world. I didn't get to see her, but I heard her. And it kind of, but if I had not done that, that convoy that left just before dark hit a box mine in the road. And that was another constant hazard. And it could be detonated from a distance by just touching two wires together. So they had dug a hole in the road and buried this wooden box because wood cannot be detected when they swept the roads, the mine sweepers. It picks up metal. And I guess the gooks waited until maybe the Jeep went by and something, but the one that was loaded down with Marines, it went off under that 6 by, and it blew the truck up and almost twisted the rear wheels upside down. And we had a new lieutenant that had come into Vietnam and all of his extensive training to take over as a lieutenant, in a combat situation. And he rode up front because rank has its privileges. So he sat up front in the cab. But they were just burnt alive in the cab, unrecognizable. The rest were blown, 40 and 50 feet away from the center of the truck. Uh, It was awful. And when the corpsmen got there, they sent some guys, a squad from Hill 52, rushed to the scene with one or two corpsmen. And like, who do you treat first? You know, it was that kind of situation. They were burned badly, all of them, from the gasoline, and 8 died instantly. And the other 8 or so, I think 5 or 6 of them died, within hours or within a day from the severe burns. Uh, but it was another case for me of divine intervention. If I had have not insisted, because you never get back to An Hoa when we're going to, and you had to do what you're going to do at that time. And just luckily it was, the 21st of December, and I had my Christmas call home, but it saved my life. I thank the Lord every day because of these situations that of divine intervention. I got to live long enough to be a husband and a father and a grandfather, and we have 7 grandchildren. And I could be on that wall many times, in D.C. My name, but I don't call it luck. I call it divine intervention. He had something for me to do, I guess, the Lord. But it just went on like that, and uh, until your day was up, and you got to get on that chopper and catch that freedom bird home, and uh, and we all kept a calendar, a piece of paper. It was a picture of a girl, naturally, and you'd color off a day, every day until you started filling your calendar up. I guess it maybe give you a little psychological help. Uh, but when you got below 100 days, if you made it that far without being killed or wounded, because so many guys, I lost 3 guys in my squad when I took over as squad leader. But they were fixed and came back. It wasn't wounds that had to, leave country. But that short time was calendar. When you got under 100 days, you were called a 2-digit midget. So and that's kind of where uh, James Lowry was. That was went in to get stitches in his mouth. I mean, it cost him his life. He had like 35 days left, and they usually pull us out of the bush after your 11th month. They gracefully give you a month in a safe area back in the rear until your flight date to leave, so where you can unwind, and but uh, the highs and lows of combat, bored stiff on a patrol, or nothing's happening till we called it when the S hits the fan, when you got to do something quick and your adrenaline just starts pumping over. But the highs and lows, and you don't have time to grieve. When someone is you've just patched the guy up and seeing all that bloody mess, and you don't have time in the moment because your adrenaline is in charge of you. You see what I'm saying? And you can do the things you have to do, but then you'll unwind later. And I think uh, storing this up and the highs and lows, you know, it's a proven fact that a couple of years ago in the American Medical Journal, American Medicine, that the cardiologist, the other chemicals that are put off in these highs and lows can actually affect your heart, eventually. And I did go through this atrial fib and stuff like that when I came home. But I mean, not, it's okay now. But that's just what you did for 365 days, and I'll never forget it. I learned more in Vietnam than anything else I've learned in my life so far. Uh, uh, about anything. I couldn't have spent 4 years in college and learned what I learned in Vietnam, about life, to be appreciative. It rained. When I got there in September, it was already raining. And it rained periodically, but I mean almost every day. But you get moments when it would slack up until January.
Mm.
So for 4 months over there, you go through the monsoon season and then the hot, dry season. And that's when the rice paddies get flooded and the rice gets planted and the sun, helps it grow. So you were either wet, I mean, soaking wet right to your underclothing. And guys would get, we call them gook sores inside of their thighs, just raw from wet pants as you were walking. And so the cornman's face, immersion foot was bad. I still use lotions and things today, for flaky feet. Uh, it would get sometimes 123 during the hot season, 115 to 123. And it may have only, I didn't have a thermometer, but during the monsoon season, you were wet and cold. And it could have only been 65 or 60, but still, when you're wet and it's a cold rain, and mornings you would wake up, it'd be a fog, and it looked like death. And the ceiling, the clouds would be low to the ground. And in those times, it was critical because choppers couldn't fly. They had to wait for a break in the clouds, because I guess they just didn't have the navigational stuff to at that time too. So if you had some wounded, you might not could get them out as quick. So you went from 4 months of that kind of climate to extreme heat. But I went from being the new guy, September the 18th, in the squad, learning my ropes. Keep your eyes and ears open and your mouth shut when you're a beginner, a newcomer. And you were classified a newcomer until you were in your first firefight, contact with the enemy. We call that baptism by fire. Once you got through that, and the other guys that's been around, some with 8 and 9 months ready to go home, the real seasoned veterans, that's good. They judged how well you held up under fire. So uh, anyway, we call that baptism by fire, and it was like that, highs and lows, emotionals, patching up a buddy, putting them on a medevac chopper, going out on the next patrol. But then in December, uh, after Hill 52, and after that explosion on that truck, that was December 21st, they decided to move us because it was the Christmas was coming, and we have a 24-hour ceasefire. The war supposedly stops for 24 hours. The enemy hardly ever. It gave them a chance to move equipment and things, so you could barely see Hill 65 from Hill 52. But we loaded up all of our gear and got in a column and humped to Hill 65 to spend Christmas. A safer place to be. And you still had to sit in a bunker at nights, and some stay awake and take turns, stand and watch. But we all had to be awake until midnight, 100% alert until midnight. So we were in this bunker, a small bunker. You could stand up in it, and I guess it would come up to your chest, so you could just, lay your rifle. And anyway, and we knew we were in a safe area, so we weren't so much as looking out there, because that was a pretty big place. And I might could tell you two of the other guys' names, but anyway, this is how I spent Christmas. I wrote this story in the Daily Press, Your Most Memorable Christmas.
Mhm.
Uh, and I told Gladys, I said, I'm going to enter this contest. It was 2005. read some stories from previous Christmases, and it was going to grandma's house and baking cookies all day. And I mean, they were touching stories, but I said, I want to write about my night on Christmas Eve. And we were four in there, and we were talking real low. Somebody had a transistor radio. We had that real low, so we could hear that. We didn't have to worry so much about giving away our position because we were up on this nice secure hill. And we had made some sea ration coffee in a can with a heat tablet in the bottom of the hole, so it didn't really put off but a blue glow. So we each made us a hot cup of coffee. We talked about how we celebrated Christmas back home, each one of us, and you pull out an old letter that you've already read 3 times, but you haven't gotten a new one yet, so you'll just reread a letter and and sharing what they did, their traditions and things like that was heartwarming. And we had our coffee, and then about midnight, somebody from the CP had a box of candy canes, so he ran from hole to hole all the way around the hill and threw candy canes in there. So that was a treat. And we just listened to Christmas music and sharing stories of home and drinking a hot cup of coffee. And one of the guys was killed a couple of weeks or maybe a month later, Ron Morgan. Uh, and I was just happy to think that we helped him celebrate his last Christmas, but he didn't know it. But anyway, and as it got real dark, we used these pop-ups. They were red, green, and white. And if you're coming in on a patrol, I'm backing up to explain the pop-ups. In its first light, you'll call to the perimeter, see where the guys are, and say, "This is Delta One Alpha coming in off the night patrol. We're getting ready to enter. I'm going to pop a flare." You don't say, "I'm going to pop a green flare." You say, "I'm going to pop a flare." So you pop the flare. It was like 4th of July. It was just something that you would celebrate 4th of July with. And but then he would say green. You'd say yes, green. Because see, the enemy, they have captured those flares too and smoke grenades. So that's why you never tell the color of what you're going to pop, and then when they know it's green, you come on in. Because if any yellow ones pop, that's the end, that's the way. And same with a smoke grenade. When you call a chopper in for medevac, and he's way up there, you say, "We're going to identify the position. I'm going to throw a smoke." And they came in different colors too, but they didn't spray like that. It was just smoke. It just made smoke. And for the chopper, he could see where the casualty was. But see, if you were to say, "All right, I'm getting ready to throw red smoke," well, 4 red smokes could pop, because the enemy had them, and you'd want to know. So you never tell the color of what you're going to throw.
That's great.
But like I say, it was around midnight, and down in the valley we were looking, and we couldn't hear them, but you could see red, white, and green, and they'd go up. Well, there was some Marines evidently in an outpost way out there in the dark, and so a couple of us, and we kind of broke the silence. I mean, it's not like we were giving away our positions. We were going to join the celebration, so we grabbed some, hit them on the bottom, and and they popped. But I mean, they kind of reprimanded us pretty quick, and but we got to. That's how we spent, Christmas Eve, and it wasn't at grandma's house. It wasn't even at your own house. But you have to learn to live off of memories, and you never threw a letter away. Before I left, I came in contact, well, with friends of mine, even my English teacher, when I was a senior in high school, she was beautiful and I fell in love. I had that crush on her. So I said, when I go to Vietnam, I said, So she gave me her address and she wrote me back. And I said, and then when I answered, I said, I expected to get this letter graded, with red. My punctuation wasn't right or something like that, or a D minus. But so, because letters were important. And once a month, I'd get a shoebox from home. And, I'd tell my mom, go to the grocery store, get packets of like Lipton instant soup, anything that you can just add water. Because we had, with what we had to carry and the flak jackets that we wore as a protective, trying to help protect your torso, they weighed about 20 pounds. And all the Marines, the Army didn't wear them, nobody else, but the Marines wore flak jackets. So with the weight and things we had to carry, anything to eat was, if we could get some dehydrated things, and which worked, and I'd always get like 8 pairs of socks because during the monsoon, if you got a chance to take your boots off, we did, even if we were in the bush for a little while. I mean, the sun could once in a while peek out. It might be for 2 hours, but just try to get some sunlight on your feet. And but when you take your wet boot off and put that dry sock on, it was like crawling inside of a sleeping bag. It was warm and cozy, but you were wet. You were just wet. And when we'd be on patrols and you would take five and sit down for a minute, steam would just come all out of the collar of your neck, because your body heat and your wet clothing. So it was miserable conditions for us. Uh, I never got into the anti-war stuff, but we were all angry about that, and uh, but everybody thought what they were doing was right. Many went to Canada. I've got family in Sweden. My cousin said many young men fled to Sweden. They were burning draft cards, but and waving American Viet Cong flags at their protests and college campuses and in D.C. If you don't like the war and you're anti-war, okay, but we were all patriotic. Most of the Marines, 2/3 of the Marines that fought in Vietnam were volunteers. 1/3 were draftees. In World War II, 2/3 were draftees and 1/3 volunteer.
Hmm.
We all wanted to be there. We had a patriotic feeling. Uh, After seeing the horrors of that war for 4 years of high school, most people think, who in the world would want to go there? But I felt it was a need. I felt it was my duty, and I was proud to go. And it was so bad. I mean, there were times we found in captured equipment stuff that was sent from Berkeley College or medical supplies neatly packaged up for an address of a college back home. You know, we killed a Duke one night on a night act out there, and in his pack, it was full of English toffee. And we just all divvied it out and ate some candy that was, one platoon. It didn't happen to us, but we had heard that they sent a package, a case of dog food, to a Marine unit that they had their address because we were animals, we were. I felt like I didn't belong anymore. You had hatred for them, you despised them. When Jane Fonda went and sat on that anti-aircraft gun and put us down and even made the statement that all the prisoners in the Hanoi Hilton and any of them that the pilots were shot down should be tried as war criminals and executed. And here we are. Trying to keep a buddy from bleeding out. And then told later when it was time and your number was up to come home, they advised you not to wear your uniform. Don't fly home in your uniform. They spit on you. Uh, I'm still angry about it, but everybody's entitled to their own opinion. but to run. We fought in a war probably where it was more deeply divided than the Civil War. And the sad thing about it, the country we flown into had three regime changes from 1962 until 1968. And they were fighting amongst themselves. They wanted to be free and independent and to be a democracy. And that's why we were there. But there was so much corruption in the Vietnamese government. Yeah, it was just unbelievable. And even the civilians that you saw, most of them despised you, and little kids would give you the finger, and you would think, who taught him that or whatever. But so you had to kind of, I mean, there's pictures in here you'll see later of us kneeling down in the two corpsmen of a little wounded child about skinny as a rail, just got caught in a crossfire, and we did everything to save that child. And sometimes injured children we'd medevac them, and get them back to the village or the area where they were hurt. Uh, so it was cruel, it was harsh, it was uncomfortable, it was miserable, and you're taking a human life. Nobody should ever have to do that. Uh, but I made out. I never let it. If you remain detached, you'd go crazy. And everybody in Vietnam was wounded. Not some with physical scars, and the rest with mental scars.
Sure.
And I'm one with the mental scars. And uh, I've been recently. I had to fight for my PTSD when I first got it way back. I worked through the VA, the veterans, and used one of their representatives. And of course, they worked for the VA. I got 10% disability, like $90 a month. Then when I went for my hearing loss, they thought, "What are you trying to do? Double dip here and taking advantage of the?" And I was furious about that, but I got my hearing loss. And in 2012, I fought for more things when I was going through all the atrial fib and different things. I had a neurological disorder with polymyalgia rheumatica, and I was exposed to Agent Orange, every one of us. So, it's the most deadly chemical known to mankind. And I'm lucky, really, to still be here and functional. Uh, but I'm not a basket case. I still go to church. I taught for years, Sunday school, and I'm a deacon at Irvington Baptist Church. Uh, when I came back from Vietnam, I married my first wife, uh, in 71 and still lived in Newport News. We had two children, Eric and Holly. When they got to be about 7 and 11 years old, uh, she wanted to leave. And we had just at that time moved to Middlesex because I always wanted a farm. I like to hunt, I like to camp, I like to freshwater fish, and I like to be in the woods if I just go and sit.
Mhm.
I like that mountaintop experience. So we do have a little camper. Well, after we split up, I had the two children, so I had to maintain. I had to uh, be mom and dad. We were already over here in Middlesex County in '83. The first church we joined was Harmony Grove. Uh, but so my kids come home from school one day and said, "Dad, our friends, all of our friends, go to Lower Methodist Church. Could we go?" And I said, "I don't see why not. I mean, we sing the same song." So we did that, and I didn't realize we were there for 31 years. But anyway, 4 or 5 years later, I met Gladys, and I kind of knew her because her son played Little League with my son, in the little at the beginning of Little League. And She was divorced with Chase Withers, who was 15 when we got married, and mine were, well, he was 12 or 13. Eric, my son, was 15, and Holly was 18, getting ready to graduate from high school. So we blended our family together. It's been a blessing ever since. And uh, we had a house fire. I had my own photo album. I kept an Instamatic camera on my cartridge belt on the back in Vietnam. Kept it wrapped in plastic during the monsoons. I documented my whole tour of Vietnam, put it in a combination scrapbook photo album, similar to this, but in the old Instamatic type pictures that turned green after so many years. And and these documents up here, we had just moved from the room where the fire started, and that's how I still have them. The ink of the signatures of Secretary of the Navy or whoever ran because some water got behind them. But my photo album was just burnt to a crisp, and I immediately got on the phone. I kept in touch with my corpsman and a buddy he was in Michigan, one in New Hampshire, Vince, any of them. And they put pictures on a disc, and sent them to me. And of course, I still don't know a whole lot about a computer at all, but I took them to Walmart and couldn't wait to get home. And then 2 years ago, I got a phone call at my breakfast table, and it was a man saying, "Is this the Larson residence?" I said, "Yes, it is." He says, "Is it Steve?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "It's Lieutenant Wills, Mike Wills, from your platoon commander from Vietnam." I said, "Holy heck, I can't believe it." So for 2 hours, I didn't even finish eating. We just talked and talked and talked. Now, he did come to see me when I first came back from Vietnam. When he got back into States, he came and looked me up and spent a night or two with my first wife and I. But it was great. And but see, we all moved 4 times usually in our lifetime, and that's why we ended up in Middlesex. And never regret it. I love it here. It's paradise. Uh, but he said there's a reunion and it's been going on for this will be the when 2021 it was the 21st 51st reunion, not the 21st, the 51st. And I said, wow. And so we went to that. Our wives go. Then we had one last year in Fredericksburg, and we got one coming up in Branson, Missouri. But Dale Wilson is the one and the reason why we even have, for his sacrifice, losing, you know, 3 limbs. And they left a little nub on his bad arm. I was telling you as we were talking before our photographer got here, but it's a Marine Corps emblem there. And he told that surgeon, "Don't you cut 1/8 of an inch off of that tattoo." So he left him a nub. But hey, we talked all the time during the year. We're going to go and spend the night at each other's house. But when we have our reunions, all our wives come, some grown children, and lots of grandkids. So you'll see all these later as we skim through the album. And but I did lose Mike Wills tragically. He died Saturday a week ago. He had a massive stroke. Nothing that he could survive from. And we didn't get the information and everything until Monday, but we hightailed it to Louisville, Kentucky this past week. And uh, I had never had a chance to meet his wife. She didn't come to the first two reunions. They were in the process of moving to Louisville to be near his 4 grown children and all of his grandkids. So at least he got to spend 2 years down the street from one of them, just 4 houses down. So uh, I'm looking forward to Branson, Missouri. And we've all, after each reunion, we find someone else. So I've got some new people coming. Sheriff Bushy was instrumental in helping me uh, find. I gave him a list of 4 names, and the age should be from 73 to 75, and the state that I thought they lived in. We tried it on the computer, Gladys and I, but you'd reach a certain point and you had to put your credit card in there. And so, but the sheriff can find anybody, anywhere, anytime. So David would come by here, and he's a former Marine. I think the world of David Bushy. He joined our Marine Corps League, which is housed in Gloucester, but it covers Middlesex, Matthews, Gloucester, and King and Queen. And I do all the toys by myself for Toys for Tots in
That's
Middlesex
great.
County. And I will as long as I can walk and breathe. So I enjoy that. It's
Rewarding.
very rewarding.
Well, Steve, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you very, very much. And I think we'll definitely have captured a lot of meaningful things.
Okay. I hope so.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Yeah. Okay. I wrote some touching things about Christmas in
I
Vietnam.
read part of it quietly when you were.
Well, everything burned up in my photo album, and where I had this, but the flames just licked and left everything intact. That and I mailed it to them for Christmas on the 24th of November because I said if I keep this in my pack and it gets wet during the monsoon, I will just send it way early.
Right.
So, but it's a
Right.
miracle too that
Yeah.
as much as
It
burned
kind
it.
of gives it a nice finished look.
Oh yeah.
I also read pieces of the letter in there. I guess to your buddies, it has the shit in the.
Oh, yeah. Well, I told my preacher when he looked at it, I said, it's got some bad things about
Some Marine, so hey.
girls.
Right. There you go.
Yeah,
What?
it's
So what?
pretty vulgar language. But when you're 19, that's all we thought about.
Well, of course, I was a nurse for 43 years and I trained at Philadelphia General. So I know the military based hospital up there. And one of my good friends served in the hospital in Germany up until last year. Gosh, probably 30 years. And we'd write at Christmas in Stuttgart, Germany. And we're receiving, I guess it was Air Force or something. But I'm hardened. You talk about battlefield hardness. As a nurse.
Oh, if you're a nurse, hey.
I'm a nurse. And I have seen stuff that you create it's not a barrier, but it's a protective coating to your emotions.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You have to. And you separate yourself from it. And that's how you just do it.
See, that was the other way, so I thought it
You
was,
do
had
what
to
you have
turn
to
it
do.
immediately.
Well, my
You-
thought is go ahead and start. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pan. So
So I just
go ahead and just
keep it moving. But
go ahead and, yeah, and if there's something you want to stop and point out, do it.
This is the photo album I put together in the past 2 years. After a meeting and a reunion 2 years ago, I managed to get about 50 pictures. I had 20 of my own. This is our headquarters. This is Jim Webb, who became Senator Jim Webb and Secretary of the Navy under Ronald Reagan. Me, my first day in country. Pictures of the group. Flying in helicopters, rice paddies full of water. More of us on patrols in tall elephant grass, spreading 10 yards apart so we wouldn't trip a booby trap. What life is like for the villagers. Some captured NVA. More patrols. Up in the mountains. We had to close the gap. You couldn't stay too far apart there because you couldn't see the man in front of you. But the NVA had base camps all up in Charlie Ridge and the Quaison Mountains. Burning a hooch. We had to build our shelters out of ponchos. We tied a hood together, and that was our tent. We didn't have tents. We didn't carry tents. And the tents had to be about 3 foot off the ground, so they kind of disappeared in the heavy brush. This is an incident on November the 20th when a large unit of NVA, not when we were there, walked right into the middle of our perimeter and literally kind of slaughtered them. But parts of An Hoa, our rear base area, we didn't get to stay back there very long because we were constantly in the bush. This is the truck that ran over the box mine. It was a 6x. All these men were killed instantly. There was 16 on the truck. The other 8 died shortly after. More guys, different squads, different platoons. This is our corpsman. This is Staff Sergeant Galloway, I told in my story. He didn't kneel down with his map. He laid his weapon across his arm and was looking at his map when the sniper fired, and it hit 1/4 of an inch on the edge of his sight there, and he's lucky to be alive. This is my squad right here out on a patrol. Little Papa Son, I took that picture. This is our corpsman. For Christmas, he had some white boxer shorts on with red hearts on them, and he took shaving cream and made a white beard to be Santa Claus. The Marine Corps had a saying, you have to improvise, adapt, and overcome. This is Vince. He lost his leg on a patrol. They said if he was a few minutes later getting to the aid station, he wouldn't have made it. This is where he lost down to 81 pounds after many, many months in the hospital. This is a child that I spoke about that got caught in a crossfire. And you can just see the looks on the corpsman's face of just sadness and heartache. It's tough. This is Dale Wilson with the machine gun. He tripped that booby trap in early February and lost both legs and his right arm. And our whole reunions that's been going on since 1970 centers around Dale Wilson. He's a very productive guy. He's in a Marine Corps League in Charlotte, North Carolina. He spoke for many organizations. He is very instrumental in helping the DAV, and he will not park in a handicapped parking space. He leaves that for someone that needs it. Here we are, just in many different locations, the northern AO, the central AO. That's me right here. We're getting ready to go out on a kill team. You take 4 men and a radio, and since you don't take a corpsman with you, these are battle dressings right here, just in case. It's kind of spooky when it's just 4 of you. Dialogue Pass, we did helicopter operations out of there all over. We actually had a USO show right here at Dialogue Pass. Wow, it was very, very good to hear some rock and roll music back from the States. These are different squads. This was my squad. Me kneeling right here. A corpsman that I became really good friends and close to right here, Rick Gorham. Staff Sergeant Galloway in the bottom right there, the one that had almost took a bullet in the heart. He's lucky. This is Doc Rick right here and myself making a little hooch by tying our 2 ponchos together. I'd talk about Sweden until we'd fall asleep, and he'd talk about his girlfriend that he left behind. Waiting on the LZ here with a scout dog and heading back out to the bush. Here we are in these helicopters loading up. We were boarding this chopper, my squad. We were leaving the bush and we were being relieved by the South Vietnamese army. So we set up a perimeter in the bush in a round field so they could land 4 helicopters. And we secured the area for them to land. But when we were, they set security up for us so we could get on the choppers and leave. But I was walking across or running across the field to get on it. One of the crewmen walked down the back ramp, I guess to be able to tell his mom and dad that he actually put his feet on the soil in a combat area. And as we were running inside that ramp, a sniper shot him right behind his ear. We didn't know where the bullet hit him, and the corpsmen were laying beside him trying to find out the entrance, but he was turning purple from the lack of oxygen. But we were dropping his body off at An Hoa. These officers right here, a couple of times, I don't know how it lost communication. The supply chopper didn't come out for a while, so we were running low on C rations. So Staff Sergeant Galloway right here took some cardboard from a C ration sign, several of them, and made a big note with the marker, "We will fight for food," so a helicopter could see it from above. And anyway, they enjoy eating some C rations. This card I kept in my pack. It's a Christmas card. I was in back at An Hoa. You don't get many chances to get back there, but I bought this Christmas card. I had to mail it on November the 29th. Yeah, November 24th, 69. Anyway, our house fire, where I lost my other album, somehow burned all the way around the edges of this Christmas card. But the message must have been special, I guess. These are some, these came out of my record book of all the operations I participated in, and Jim Webb signed off on the first one. And anyway, the ribbons and medals I'm entitled to. I wrote Jim Webb in 2010, and he answered me when he was Senator of Virginia on his senator stationery. This is a contest I entered at the Daily Press for the adult writing, just telling our most memorable Christmas. And I chose Vietnam, not thinking I would win first prize. Me, how young I looked right after infantry training. Some clippings from Stars and Stripes. This is where Delta 15 was hit pretty hard at Liberty Bridge. We had 3 human wave assaults with 100 NVA in each wave, but we lost 1 Marine. They're walking on the tank treads. That's why they're so close together, but at least you know if the tank made it through that there are no booby traps on that ground. This is just everybody in Delta Company, from our commanders to, as of January, who was in Delta. It's funny to look at us, these old pictures, and then see us at the reunions when I get to the back of this book. That's me leaving, saying farewell. The #1 song on armed forces radio stations in Vietnam was played constantly because it was by Peter, Paul, and Mary. I'm leaving on a jet plane, so I put in here, I'm leaving on a jet plane, don't know if I'll be back again. And saying farewell to my corpsman friend and Staff Sergeant Galloway. And a funny little note from Bob Hope. I kept letters in a shoebox where I kept in contact with my squad, keep up how they were and what's going on and keep me informed. A lot of it's bad news, but I thought it would be appropriate to have them in this book. A long emotional letter from my corpsman friend who started his own church, he and his wife, in Battle Creek, Michigan. This was my first reunion 2 years ago. It's only 12 to 15 of us. There's Dale again, that's a triple amputee. This is Vince from my squad who lost his leg. This officer just recently died last Saturday with a massive stroke. Still ran every morning. We celebrated Dale's birthday at the reunion. All of the wives come and some grandchildren, grown children and grandchildren. This is another company commander we lost down here at the bottom, Linehan, January a year ago, and this was last year. It was in Fredericksburg, perfect for Gladys and I, but hard for the ones on the West Coast. And Jim Webb fed us lunch that day at his office on the 8th floor. He had 2 hours to give to us, so anyway, it was a joy seeing him again. And here we are lined up on this balcony. So looking forward to this reunion coming up in Branson, Missouri this July.